Hello! It's the Beefy Sandwich Subcast, MMO edition, part 2. I'm Mass, and with me we have...
Wayne.
Wayne, you know your name.
Hello,
Introduce
guys.
yourself.
I'm Wayne. You may know me, you may not. That's cool.
You may know him from episode 1.
If you don't know me from episode 1, then, I'm just a bit upset, to be fair.
Yeah. And if you had listened to episode 1 or even watched episode 1, you would have listened to us speak about the Trinity system. The good old Trinity system.
Yep, we basically just went into details about the mostly the pros of it, because me and Mass don't really see many cons with it. We tried to play a bit of devil's advocate, but
yeah, I don't think it went too well
system.
playing devil's advocate, but we just kept coming up with like good things.
Because how can you flaw the system? Like, it's there for a reason. But anyway,
Bias. Okay, yeah, go.
Yeah, this isn't the Trinity podcast, but
It's not. No.
We did say at the end of the last class that we would touch on the Trinity system in PvP, because we were very PvE based with all of our talkings and such. And so personally, in PvP, I do and I do not like the Trinity system. I think it can be very overpowered and very weak all at the same time. If you've got eight people, I'm always going to use 8 people as an example. If you have 8 people, you average 2 healers, 1 or 2 tanks in PvP, and 4 or 5 DPS. It's going to be very hard just to take them out unless you manage to get a key player down. They can kind of just destroy a lot of people if they're a good enough group. Having a Holy Trinity against another Holy Trinity is very what's the word I'm looking for? Interesting, because it literally just comes down to skill. Which is cool. That's cool, but then
it's almost like a positive against a positive.
Yeah,
like trying to get that connection going, and it's like just repels each other. So it's the same thing, but like you said, it's all dependent on skill.
Yeah, and a lot of PvP in these current days and current metas is normally all about burst damage, and you don't have too much burst damage in a balanced Trinity way of PvP.
True. Yeah.
So, yeah, like it does have its upsides, but I think it's more or less a very, maybe not amateur, maybe adept way to PvP. But then like it's not the best way to PvP. So I think Holy Trinity is really good for PvE. Just it lets itself down in PvP a little bit.
Yeah, I would agree. Like when I think of PvP, I know a lot of people think like these giant PvP maps where you're sort of teleported to and you work together with other people, and it makes sense that in that case, if you're working with someone, then the Trinity could work because you're with people, you're dependent on other people, so it can work that you work together and you can take down, other groups and whatnot. But when you're soloing as a PvPer, and I'm not sure if a lot of people solo as PvP, because I don't PvP myself, but that's how I always just imagined it, like some sort of thief. I guess because I don't PvP, and if I just go around killing things, it would be in like non-MMO games like Skyrim, where you'd play like a thief or something, and you're not exactly PvPing another player, but it's sort of, the same idea where you'd sort of sneak around and just like murder someone from behind or something like that. So I can sort of see where not having the Trinity system, if you're PvPing by yourself, would work, because you don't have to really depend on anyone, and the whole, most people when they PvP, I think they tend to go for like the thief or the rogue, the DPS type. So, soloing as a PvPer, DPSer, you're probably going to do pretty well with that. But if you're against a Trinity, then maybe not so much.
But then that brings up the idea of why like soloing. We spoke about this a lot in the previous subcast. Soloing in an MMO isn't really what the MMO is all about. It's about finding groups of people, making team builds. Not necessarily a Trinity build, but team builds, like, so you have that upper hand, that upper advantage. You have the voice comms, like TeamSpeak or Venture, Mumble, whatever you're using, even Skype, to overcome whatever's thrown at you. So going into PvP solo, you're always going to be at a disadvantage anyway.
No, yeah, that makes sense. No, that makes sense. I don't know. I guess it'd be difficult to imagine what PvP would be like without the Trinity if you're soloing, because if you're a tank, then PvPing seems like, unless you've got a healer that's back you up, you're going to go down pretty fast. Because tanks generally, as much as they can take damage, they can't really dish it out too well, and they don't tend to have heal spells, to keep themselves up. So I don't know how that would work. Like I said, I'm not too into PvP, so I'm not really sure how that would work. But I don't know. I mean, like, I can imagine like a healer trying to PvP, and I mean, they tend to have like some sort of nukes. A lot of them do, and to be able to heal themselves as well I would imagine gives them a huge advantage.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I used to PvP a little bit back in the day in Star Wars Republic, a lot in Guild Wars 1, but Guild Wars 1 PvP was a lot different it's so complicated to give an example. But using Star Wars, even if we only had two of us, the PvP in Star Wars Republic was 8 versus 8. And me or my friend would go healer, and then me or my friend would go tank. We'd have a healer and tank, and we'd just team up together. And anyone extra we had, there'd normally be some damage or something.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. So I guess it was still Trinity in a sense, but like it wasn't like a teamed up Trinity. We'd go in with our 2 or 3 people, and then the tank would just be using aggro abilities to cut down damage, would be guarding people to take half of their damage themselves.
Playing the tank, basically.
Yeah, and then the healer would be healing him up and have an easier time healing up the rest of the team. So it was kind of Trinity-like, but then all it would take is for one little bursty guy to come along, and eventually, if your DPS weren't focusing on him enough, he's just going to wipe you out. There's not much you can do. And if someone's focusing, that's what happens a lot in PvP. Your healers will get focused if you have a Trinity, and it's really hard to keep yourself up plus your team. All you need is two burst damages on a healer, and it's going to be very hard. The rest of the team can be attacking the DPS. All of a sudden, you've got so much pressure to deal with that's where the Trinity system sort of starts to cave, I guess.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, because, the healer is always going to be the foundation, and if you get rid of that, then everything tumbles.
Yeah, exactly that.
Anyway, we probably shouldn't drag this out too much, because this really wasn't supposed to be a Trinity subcast today. It was literally just to cover the PvP aspect, and I don't know if you have anything else to...
I was actually just about done, more or less. I think I'll probably bring it up in the future when we do a PvP podcast.
Definitely.
PvP subcast. Because I do have a lot to say on PvP, and I don't want to sort of go into that when we've got other things planned.
Absolutely. So we didn't cover too much with PvP, especially with the Trinity Force included. So if anyone out there in the void has anything to say on the matter, or feel like we maybe missed something, or maybe we're not getting the point across, or you have something, that you'd like to get across to us, just let us know in the comments or somewhere. We have a Facebook now, I believe.
Yeah, we do. Facebook will be in the description of the video. Feel free to comment also, just on the video itself. Yes,
because most people know how to use social media nowadays.
Unless you're Matt.
Yeah, exactly.
He still lives in the 80s and has like a phone that barely has a colour screen and a camera.
Okay, moving on. So today's discussion really was on DPSing. And basically, the question is, are MMOs now more about DPSing than anything else? What do you think, Wayne?
Honestly, we touched on this a bit last week. In the new age of MMOs, in this current stage of where we are now, yes, they are. They are definitely more about DPS than anything else, because take Guild Wars 2 for an example, take, what has come out recently? I don't know, take Guild Wars 2 for an example.
Yeah, go for it.
And even the way that Elder Scrolls Online is advertising itself, just from looking at it, it's all saying it's staying away from the Trinity system. That can only suggest that it's going to be very DPS based. And Guild Wars 2 is very DPS based. The meta is go squishy but high damage and kill everything before it kills you. That's the meta in Guild Wars 2. So it's just a bit iffy, you know.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how they work without the Trinity Force, like we said. But yeah, I completely agree that these new age MMOs, and saying that, a lot of the older ones as well, a lot of them, they were also quite heavy on DPS. And I've mentioned this already for you. I'm gonna throw in some backstory here, just my 2 cents, if you will.
Yeah, go.
When we think MMOs, where did they come from? I think originally a lot of them were based on the D&D board game, back in the day. From there, we got the MUDs, and then from the MUDs we got graphical MUDs, which were like the early MMOs, like EverQuest and Ultima Online. Those were originally known as graphical MUDs, and so a lot of what these games had, they'd taken from Dungeons and Dragons. And originally Dungeons and Dragons, there was a thief class. I believe there was a thief class, but they weren't specifically designed for DPS. Every class could do a reasonable amount of damage, and they were just more optimal in other parts. For example, the thief just had as much utility as it did damage, just as the cleric could heal as well as damage, So, and with MMOs, although they were able to keep that aspect of like the healer, for example, where you could heal and maybe do some damage, when it came to like the thief, who I think they sort of turned into a roguey type, they couldn't really, I felt like they couldn't really emphasize the utility of the rogue from a D&D board game to an MMO, where you'd mostly depend on, your utility, for example, your ability to sneak, because it's known as a thief, and, the perfect thief is one who can steal without having to kill, I think. But that was sort of like abandoned, maybe not on purpose, maybe they just couldn't, figure out a way to add that utility, but they turned the rogue into a DPS machine. And I think from that point on, it sort of just expanded, and it's just like grown, and from, generation to generation of MMOs, the rogue has continued to just stick to the DPS class. And as it grows in DPS, it seemed to lose the utility that it once was revolved around, if that makes any sense. And it wasn't just the rogue. I mean, you had like you had the sorcerers as well back in the D&D, where they had their utility spells with, the teleports or whatever. And now, sorcerers we know in MMOs as just the casters who just, burn their opponents down. And that's pretty much what they do. And that's, just they're DPSs,
Yeah.
I don't know if you'd agree with that, but that was just what I feel like how these MMOs have come about with the DPS role, and how it's become so big.
Yeah, I agree completely. It is a shame. I liked the idea of what you were talking about. Everyone doing their damage, but everyone also having a secondary role to
exactly.
partake in.
Yeah, it's a shame. It seems like they just stripped the non-combat parts of D&D. Like the skill checks, and the whole social stats, and the way you can influence the world rather than having to fight. It was less about solving the problems and more about killing. Well, it is nowadays, at least.
Yeah, definitely. Now it's just, hey, we're going to throw this raid boss at you. It's going to deal this amount of damage, stay out of these dots, and kill it before it kills you. Yeah. Rather than how can you use what you have in your group to your advantage against this?
Yeah, and
you
can make it
use
fun.
This mechanic to your advantage? How can you make this mechanic benefit you instead of hinder you?
Yeah. And in the sense that you could do fun things, as opposed to having to kill the boss, maybe you can convince the boss or bribe the boss to maybe like let you through to the next stage, or bribe the boss to give you the item that you've been quested to go find, or something like this. That's sort of the idea behind it, where I feel like they've taken out the adventuring from the original role of D&D, and just they've taken out the adventuring and just thrown in the whole DPS thing, because people just want to fight now and kill.
Yeah, I agree completely. It is a shame. Like, you're going way back now, because MMOs.
Sorry.
It's fine. That's absolutely fine. MMOs have evolved a lot from that into this DPS structure. That's like our last subcast, outside of Holy Trinity, came about.
Right, exactly.
But I do agree. Like, it is a shame that there isn't. It is a shame that MMOs aren't based around what they used to be when they were made, when they were created.
Right.
Which is, like you've said, like it's just this whole adventuring system. You can't really call a game an RPG if there's no adventuring involved. And I don't count like just exploring as adventuring. It's all the things that come with it, like you said, the social factors, the bribery, the fact that you don't have to fight to be able to win something.
You can be sneaky and do all these other things, or like try to partner up with the guy you're quested to fight, maybe just to maybe help him out, and maybe he'll help you out, that sort of thing,
Yeah, the sort of thing that you still might see in RPGs as normal, but
just
you don't see
being able to influence the world.
Yeah, it's a big shame.
And I feel like when you think about it, a lot of, I guess, if they're making these MMOs to be, DPS oriented, they could potentially be compromising on everything else. It's hard to sort of get what I mean, but let's say, for example, they'll be creating monsters for you to specifically DPS to death, rather than monsters you could perhaps sneak around or reason with or bargain with, or maybe bluff your way out of a fight or something, in like you would something you'd probably encounter in a D&D game,
Yeah, definitely. It's very possible that two of the reasons for this is that the current population of people that play MMOs tend to be. You get quite a lot of older people in MMOs actually, but you also get a lot of kids, and the kids like to complain when things aren't their way. So and all they do want to do is, like you said, just go in and jump in on a boss and
the Call of Duty generation.
Yeah, essentially, it's all because of FPS, in my opinion, anyway. But it could also secondly be just because companies that are making these games now, these developers, these writers, they could just be getting lazy, because all they need to do to keep the people happy, the majority happy, is just make some fights where they DPS to win. Yeah. Instead of going all out and programming like 20 different ways, well, 20 may be a bit much, but you get the point, like say 5 or 6 different ways to get past this part of the mission, get past this boss. Yeah. And it could be laziness. Like maybe they just don't want to do that anymore.
It's quite sad to hear that as well. And you have to think, where does that leave the rest of us inside of a world which is potentially created more for the DPS role, Like I think I mentioned in the last subcast how I did play Guild Wars 2. I know you've played it yourself. And I just remember in Guild Wars 2 that I would literally run from one quest hub to the other, just doing these random quests that they were so meaningless that it wasn't fun. It was so generic, and you'd level your way up to 50 or just soloing your way. And every now and again you'd get like a zone boss, and everyone would gather and they would DPS their way, they would DPS the zone boss and kill it in like 10 minutes. And, for those few minutes that you were together, you felt like you were playing an MMO, and then the zone boss was dead, and everyone just scattered like, rats in like a maze or something. It just disappeared, and you literally looked around yourself and you would see nothing. It was like a wasteland, and you just back to being by yourself again, but they've gone off to go DPS, whatever it is, but they're in such a rush there's no adventuring, there's no questing together, it's a DPS fest, and you're running from one mob to the other just to kill it and move on.
Yeah, and I played Guild Wars I'm going to say closer to 4 months almost.
Yeah, well, you played it for a lot longer than I did, so
yeah. And the issue I had with that, with the whole it's just DPS for 10 minutes, the boss will upscale, the more people we have, so maybe we'll just have to DPS it for a bit longer, depending on how well our DPS are. It just made me think, like, okay, so there's about 80 people here. This boss would go down whether I was here or not. I'm not a vital role here.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter whether I'm here or not. It's like, what's the point? I'm gonna get like a chest. I might get a really, really rare item, but the odds of that happening are about the same as me winning the lottery. So
Right.
why am I doing this? That was the realization that came over me when I sort of stopped playing a little bit, and
Right.
eventually just I've stopped playing altogether now mostly.
Yeah.
And it's a shame. Like when I love healing or tanking because I know that if I'm not there, then maybe something's not going to go. Maybe something's going to go wrong if I don't do my job properly. Maybe the DPS will start dying because the mechanics are made to have someone tank it or heal the fight, you know, rather than just DPS to win.
Yeah, no, I completely 100% agree with you. You know, like you said, somebody who wants to perhaps go like to the route of the healer in a DPS MMO where the majority of them are DPS MMOs. For example, again, but I'm gonna bring up Guild Wars too, just because it's very familiar with myself and yourself. But you would sort of unintentionally gravitate towards the role of a DPSer because that is what you tend to do. You don't, like you said, nobody relied on you, and you didn't have to rely on anyone else to heal you or for you to heal them. So you would just, like I said, unintentionally just gravitate towards that role. You know, no matter how many options you're presented with, the end result is always the same. You might look slightly different, you may feel a little different from another class, but you're DPS nonetheless.
Yeah, and because of that, because every class was a DPS, you did have a class called Guardian, and they could do things like provide a bit more survivability for the team.
Yeah.
But honestly, like in a lot of cases, it's not needed if you know how to dodge and
Right.
attack. But because of that, it resulted in, because every class is a DPS, the classes that would deal the most damage were the classes that would be used in pugs, pickup groups.
Yeah,
If you are soloing and you want to join a group of people, you could only join if you was a certain class. Because, for example, the thieves, damage got nerfed to like crazy in Guild Wars 2 because it was too high. So all of a sudden, unless you're a warrior, an elementalist, or a mesmer, you can't go in these groups because the other 5 classes just don't do enough damage. So it means that if you're new into this game and you pick a class that isn't one of the favourables, you're gonna immediately feel like an outcast unless you join a sort of friendly casual guild that will happily take you along to their runs. And that's purely for the fact that there's no room for people unless they're the best at what they do. And since the only thing that they do anymore is DPS, you can't really have 8 classes that are the best at DPS, you know?
Yeah. No, I completely get it. I just, a lot of people nowadays, I think they just automatically go for the DPS role, because I think that it's just a tradition, like we've already said, a lot of MMOs, they enjoy the DPS, and most of these games are DPS oriented, so they'll just, they'll choose those DPS classes. For example, ESO, The Elder Scrolls Online. I remember reading a poll that was, which ran on the Tamriel Foundry, I believe it was.
Yeah.
And it was, it was one of those, generic questions. Which class are you most interested in playing with? And, no surprise, it was Nightblade, because it's the whole DPS role, thing. Nightblade's considered the thief, the DPS, or the roguey sort of, type. And that didn't surprise me at all, and I think the lowest, on there, I think it was the healer.
Yeah, the cleric was the lowest.
The cleric, yeah. And it's just unfortunate that so many people now feel like they have to, head towards a DPS role, but I get it, like they can make these other classes so much more fun, these utility classes. They just add the utility in there, or add the, they can make these utility classes a lot more fun, as opposed to just pushing the DPS thing, all the way with MMOs. But if you do that, then yeah, everyone's going to choose to play a Nightblade, for example, in ESO.
Yeah, there's no point in having a tanky character if you've already announced that tanking isn't going to be used.
Right.
Like,
it sort of defeats the purpose.
yeah, essentially, or it takes that replayability as well. You could do a dungeon as a DPS, and then it used to be that you could also make a tank and a healer and do it as them as well if you wanted to get if you wanted to get the fullness from the dungeon. But now, if you've completed it once and you complete it again on a second DPS, all you're doing is using a different skill set and a slightly different playstyle to do the exact same thing that you already did before.
Yeah, I know.
It's a shame.
It is a shame, and I think a lot of MMOs are missing out on an interesting opportunity. I think I think we may have touched upon this, but they're afraid to change the structure of their games from World of Warcraft, where so many MMOs are so used to. They're so used to that sort of structure, and they tend to keep that same sort of structure along the way. They'll never change it up.
Yeah, and
I think they're afraid to change it up just in case they might, miss out on those extra subscriptions or, players.
Yeah, and because in this current, right now, for the last years, because that's a viable sentence.
No, that makes sense. I understood it, so it makes sense.
All MMOs that are released are immediately compared to World of Warcraft.
Absolutely.
And I understand. A lot of people argue that they shouldn't be because the MMO being released is brand new and it's just unfair to compare it to something that's been out for over 10 years. However, I completely disagree. I wouldn't buy a CPU that had just came out that was shitty over one that had been out for 5 years that was better just because it just came out. I would buy one that had been out for a while. So yes, I understand the competition and the comparison. However, the issue that has is now you'll go into a game and you'll go into the general chat and people will be either that you'll see one of two things. People will be saying, "Oh, WoW's better than this. I'm gonna go play WoW. This is nothing like WoW. Why is this even here?" Or they'll be saying, "Oh my god, this is a carbon copy of WoW. Why does this even exist? I'm just gonna go play WoW instead." So
you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't.
Yeah, it's like right now people are so blindsided to want to see anything that isn't WoW, maybe. And I think that's half the issue. I'm not trashing WoW. Obviously it's a great game for doing so well. I got kind of bored of it myself, but I think that was just because it seemed a bit too childish for me in the sense of not necessarily the community, just the way it played. I wasn't really a fan of that. However, that isn't me saying it's a bad game. It's just a shame that any games that want a chance in this day and age they have to do something spectacularly different that somehow captures the eye of its consumer without being well. And I don't know how they would do that right now.
No, me neither. I have no idea either. And like you said, World of Warcraft, I'm not saying it's a bad game, for these, but a lot of these games are trying to copy World of Warcraft now, and it's a shame they're not trying anything new. Like we said, World of Warcraft when that came out, it was incredible because they changed MMOs as we know it. Back then we had Ultima Online, we had EverQuest, and then you got, World of Warcraft came out and it was completely different, and that's fine. You could choose one or the other. But then, rather than, continuing the same sort of pattern as World of Warcraft, these developers stuck with World of Warcraft and that structure instead of doing what World of Warcraft did and completely changing the genre. They stuck to what it was World of Warcraft was doing, and we've already got a World of Warcraft. We don't need another one or another 16,000. We want something new, change the genre in the same way World of Warcraft did when that came out. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. When Star Wars: The Old Republic came out, I was playing that for a little while. It honestly did. A lot of people were saying it was basically WoW in space, and I can understand exactly where they were coming from because essentially it was.
Yeah.
It was World of Warcraft, except she was in a sci-fi MMO rather than an RPG MMO.
No, I agree. We're getting pretty close to the end now, so I'm going to try to include some wrap-up questions. So, if you could, what do you think, Wayne? Could you solve the problem of a game revolving around DPS? Do you even actually, could you consider it a bad thing that a game does revolve around DPS?
I don't consider it an awful thing because, you know, I still had fun with Guild Wars for like 3 or 4, well, I'd say about 2.5, 3 months.
Right.
Then I carried on with it, hoping I'd get back into it, hoping it would get better. For me, it lacks replayability. It lacks a lot of things that other MMOs have had. It means that my favourite thing to do in any MMO, as you know, Mass, is to heal. And healing in Guild Wars was pointless because it's a DPS race. And I think it's a shame that people seem to think that that's okay and that that's the way to play, because they're sort of coming into these games at this sort of level where DPS is all there is.
Yeah.
I think if people had seen games the way we had as we grew up, maybe it wouldn't be okay for them. But right now they sort of know no better.
That's all they see the MMO genre is a DPS fest, and I guess that's just the norm for them now.
Yeah, and that's not necessarily their fault. It's just the way it is, you know.
Yeah.
It's not an awful thing. However, like, I don't know how long I'd be able to put up with it. I'm already decided that I'm not going to really play another MMO for a while until something special does come out that breaks the molds of these other that breaks the mold of being either WoW or just DPS.
That's always the hope. You know, every time you see a trailer for a new MMO or, you know, a new advertisement for an MMO, there's always that tiny little bit of hope inside of yourself that just it's telling you it's something slightly different or something just different, you know. And I think that's why we were interested in Elder Scrolls Online, because they did well marketed it in the sense that it looks like it could be something different. We can't really say whether we played the game or not due to certain reasons. But I don't plan on playing Elder Scrolls Online when it comes out, just because I feel like it's sort of already fallen into the same sort of categories every other MMO for me. Like, I'm not as different as it may seem. It's also, there's a lot the same. Yeah. Does that make sense, you know?
Yeah, purely from what they've advertised. All you needed to say was they advertised it as being a DPS race. Therefore, I'm not going to play it.
That's pretty much it. I don't want to, get myself in trouble for anything that I may or may not have said.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine, no worries.
I guess I asked you if you consider it a bad thing, and in my opinion, I wouldn't say it's a bad thing, because there are people out there who do enjoy DPSing and fair game to them. But I do believe that we do need to add more role-playing elements to our MMOs. I really do think it'll be better for, not just for us who want that extra adventuring part of the game, but for these guys who only know MMOs as DPSing, give them something new, because I think they're missing out on something that could potentially be absolutely amazing. Adding role-playing elements to these games, things like bluffing and, charming your way through the game, I don't know, charm a guard to let you through into a castle, or maybe let you out of a prison cell, that sort of the whole role-playing element, which seems to be lost in a lot of role-playing games nowadays,
Yeah, and and companies are too scared to try that now because
it's too different.
Consumers are just too hostile to anything new. People don't like change now. I don't know when that happens, but people are. If someone tries to do something different now, it gets bashed straight away by the whole MMO community. Well, not Absolutely. The whole, but the majority. And it's a shame.
It is a shame. I think
it.
Just these developers, they're just too afraid, because I guess, when you think about it, they got a lot of money invested, so they tell themselves, they look at other games and they see what works, or at least what they feel works, and they may be looking at World of Warcraft and they feel that everything there works, and so that's what they're going to put everything from World of Warcraft into it. Whereas they don't choose to become unique and try something new. It's a risk, isn't it? And to take that risk would mean you could potentially be losing out. In my opinion, I don't think you would. I think you have the potential to, if you were to risk it, to potential to surpass even World of Warcraft, or to create something new alongside World of Warcraft, you know?
Yeah, it's just like, I believe it was Albert Einstein that said this, I might be wrong. But he said, if you follow the crowds, then you'll always be one step behind. But if you go in a completely different direction, you will succeed in ways that no one else ever has. And that's exactly what MMOs need to do.
Yeah.
At this stage. We need a company that has the money to risk, to feel comfortable risking, to be able to do something like that, if that makes sense.
No, that makes absolute sense, and I think that would be the perfect note to end this episode on.
Definitely.
What do you think?
Yeah, I think I could go on about this for hours.
Oh, we could keep going on about this, but I think we got the majority of what we had to say out there.
Yeah, and it will more or less be repeating ourselves, I think, as well. It's just frustrating.
Yeah.
but anyway.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, today, guys, we talked about DPS. By the way, I don't think we did, but DPS, that's damage per second.
Yes.
So that's what DPS is, for any of those who may have listened to the entire podcast and not figured that out, or Googled it. Sorry, guys, we probably should have mentioned that earlier.
But to be fair, most people already know what that means.
Yeah, I truly hope so, Wayne. I truly hope so. Okay, guys, thanks for watching the Beefy Sandwich Subcast Part 2 or Episode 2. I'm not sure. Next week, I don't think we have anything specific in mind for what we might be coming up next week. I think we sort of suggested perhaps lore, but that's still questionable. We're not sure. So tune in next week and we may just surprise you.
Yeah, it will definitely be a surprise.
Definitely. Thanks a lot, guys. Bye.